Well, first of all, happy Mother's Day to all here today. It's a tradition for us on this second Sunday of May to honor our mothers, and we want to extend to each mother and yes, to every lady in the congregation today our special words and thoughts of admiration. I have to admit, when I first started in the ministry many years ago, Mother's Day celebrations at church used to make me a bit nervous. Years ago, there used to be the tradition that the pastor would stand in front of the congregation and ask for the age of every mother that was in the congregation. And when we did that perilous activity, we would then give a gift to the oldest mother and to the newest mother and to the mother who had the most children. But I was always fearful. I thought maybe I was sticking my nose into something that I shouldn't be. Kind of glad we're just going to honor everybody today. I did hear the story about a pastor out in the state of Oklahoma that had the tradition of giving flowers to the ladies in the congregation on Mother's Day. And yes, they'd honor the oldest mother and the one with the most kids and the mother who traveled the furthest to come to church on that Sunday morning and on and on. But one year, the pastor decided he was going to spice things up just a little bit. And he thought that he might add a new category to the way that they honored mothers. And he wanted to give an award, and so he decided he was going to offer an award for the mother who had gained the most weight during her pregnancy. For some reason, no one claimed that award. Then I heard the story about the young apprentice pastor who was given the task of reading the scripture on one Mother's Day. This minister in training was to read from 2 Timothy chapter 1, that passage where Paul writes to Timothy saying, "I've been reminded of your sincere faith, which first lived in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and now I am persuaded lives in you also." That's a wonderful tribute to Christian motherhood, quite appropriate for Mother's Day. But the young minister in training was kind of nervous that morning. And when he stepped up behind the pulpit, instead of reading 2 Timothy chapter 1, he read from 1 Timothy chapter 1. And he said, "I want to dedicate this reading to all of the mothers in our congregation." And he began with these words, "Some of you have wandered from the faith, have turned to meaningless talk. You want to be teachers of the law, but you don't know what you're talking about. The law is not made for the righteous, but for lawbreakers and rebels, the ungodly and sinful, for those who kill their fathers and mothers." Not surprisingly, shortly thereafter, the annual conference transferred that pastor to another place of ministry. Someone once said, "God couldn't be everywhere at once, so he made mothers." Well, that statement is theologically incorrect, but it does convey the importance that mothers have on all of us. Mothers fill a place in our lives that no one else can fill. And even though we don't do it on purpose, I think our society tends to place more expectations on mothers than really on fathers, especially at meal times. You ever stop to think about it? Has this ever happened at your household? Dad or father comes in and says, "What's for dinner?" And the wife replies, "Well, I need to run to Giant Eagle first because we don't have any food in the house." And the husband says, "Can't you just go out into the kitchen and whip something up?" We kind of think that mothers, wives have this innate ability just to go out into the kitchen and create a meal out of nothing. Sometimes there's expectations put on mothers that aren't put on fathers. I mean, when was the last time the kids came in when mom was working and said, "Dad, what's for dinner?" And Dad looks in the freezer and there's nothing to microwave, and so he says, "Who wants pizza tonight?" No one ever says, "Dad, can you go out into the kitchen and whip something up?" Now, I'm not trying to create stereotypes And I'm certainly not saying that a woman's place is in the kitchen. But what I do see is that mothers, women, are bombarded with many dual roles and mixed messages. It is typically expected of mothers to contribute to the family life, to consistently live on a limited budget, to get the kids off to school each day with matching socks and shoes on the right feet, to maintain the family's social calendar, and on it goes. And it's not an easy job. That's why we pause on the second Sunday of May to say thank you. Thank you to the ladies who help keep life moving in the right direction. Every mother that's here this morning is aware that her job involves a lot more than just cooking and cleaning and carpooling. But a true mother's job also involves nurture. It involves guidance. It involves building character in the life of her children. I'm standing here today because of a mother who did that in my life. And mothers, that doesn't stop when your kids move out of the home. Mothering takes on a continued role, just in a different way. I remember learning that lesson from my own mother. I went home to see my parents at one time. They were living in the state of Florida. I went down. I was sitting there talking to my mother in their living room. Now, let me remind you, I was married. I was pastoring a church. And while we were talking, my mother started looking at the bottom of my shoes. And my mother said, "Forrest, are those your good shoes?" And I said, "Yes." She said, "That one has a hole in the bottom of it." And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Forrest, you can't be sitting up on the pulpit on Sunday morning with a hole in the bottom of your shoes." And it wasn't long before we went to the store and I got a new pair of black shoes. Compliments of my mother. Seems like a mother's work is never done. I want us to look, though, for a few moments about a biblical mother. I want us to look at the story of Jesus and his mother that I read in your hearing just a moment ago. Here in John chapter 2, we see that Mary played a vital role in the life of Jesus and throughout his ministry. And she remained with Jesus to the very end. Think about it. She was there at the very beginning on that starry night through those early years. And now here in John chapter 2, we find her being there at the start of his ministry. And Jesus' mother had a role to play in the first miracle he performed. John chapter 2 tells us that Jesus and his disciples were attending a wedding in Cana of Galilee. And his mother Mary was there in attendance as well. The Bible doesn't tell us whose wedding it was, but Mary must have known the family because she felt obligated to do something when the bridegroom ran out of wine. Now, weddings back in Palestine were times of feast and great celebration that went on for days. And as the celebration would go on, it was crucial that the celebration continue with an abundance of wine. This wasn't because everyone at the reception got drunk like at so many wedding receptions today, but it was a part of the culture of that day that wine was the chosen beverage. It was available to everyone. Hospitality was a sacred thing in that culture, and running out of wine would be considered a very humiliating experience for the wedding host. So we read that happened, and Mary comes to Jesus and says, they've run out of wine, and Jesus looks at his mother, and it may seem abrupt to you, almost rude, his response, if you don't understand the context of what he said. He said, "Dear woman, why do you involve me? My time has not yet come." The King James Version that I read in your hearing a moment ago is a little more harsh sounding. "Woman, what have I to do with thee? Mine hour has not yet come." Now, if you were to address your mother as woman, it would be considered disrespectful. But let me remind you, Jesus didn't speak to his mother in English. He spoke to his mother in Aramaic. And the term that he used with his mother was a term of honor that could be translated into our English language, dear mother, dear woman, gracious lady. And the phrase, what have I to do with thee, is a Hebrew idiom that doesn't mean mind your own business, but it means translated, leave things to me, and I'll settle them my way. And so Mary turns to the servants who were at that wedding reception and says to them, do whatever he tells you. And John goes on to tell us that there were 6 20 to 30 gallon stone water jars that were there for ceremonial washing. The Jews were very much a part of a group that wanted purity. And so these stone jars were for the purification. Galilean water was not purified water like comes out of our faucets today. It was not the most consumable type of water. And so Jesus tells these servants to fill the jars with water, and John tells us they filled them to the brim. They did just what he told them, and then he told them something unique. He said, draw some of it out and take it to the master of the banquet. Now, the master of the banquet was not the bridegroom. He was more like the head waiter. His job was to make sure that the reception ran very smoothly. And so the servant drew out some of the liquid from the stone jars and took it to the banquet master, and he tasted it. And then notice verse 10. He says, everyone brings out the choice wine when the cheaper wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you've saved the best unto now. And we look how Jesus and his mother related to one another here in a moment of crisis, in a moment of difficulty. And I think how they related to one another really can give us 3 principles that mothers and children can learn from that story. I think these lessons teach us, as we've heard sung about and made reference to, how a mother's faith definitely impacts our lives. And I think mothers can also learn what a positive role they can play in their children's life while their children are growing up, as well as when they get into adulthood as well. So 3 lessons from this passage this morning. Here's the first. Mothers, be involved in your children's lives. Can I say that again? Mothers, be involved in your children's life. It isn't a coincidence that Jesus and his disciples were at this wedding celebration, and his mother was there too. Jesus stayed involved in his mother's life, and Mary stayed involved in her son's life. They continued to spend time together. You know, I hear parents oftentimes making jokes about how much they're looking forward to getting the kids out of the house and out of their hair. And I hear kids say how much they're looking forward to getting out of the house under their parents' control as soon as possible. George Burns, the old comedian, used to say, happiness is having a large, loving, caring, close-knit family in another city. But the fact of the matter is, the closer the parents remain to the children, even in adult years, the better off the family is. Now listen, I'm not talking about parents controlling their children's lives, making their children's decisions, running their children's lives. What I'm talking about is parents and children keeping the lines of communication open. Being able to talk together, to celebrate life together, continuing to do things together, continuing to enjoy one another's presence, celebrating that God placed you within a family. And moms, that's part of your responsibility throughout life. Make sure that your children enjoy being with you. Just as you tried to brighten their days when they were little ones within the home, as they get older, continue to try to brighten your children's day. Try to encourage them. Try to lift them up. I say this because I believe God has given mothers the power to do that in a very special way. More than anyone else in the world, a mother can brighten a child's day just by being a pleasant presence in their lives. God can use that for His honor and glory. Now, that doesn't always happen. Sometimes mothers feel that they're somewhat ignored by their children. There was a fellow who called his mother one day and asked how she was doing, and she said, "Oh, I'm not very good, I'm very weak." And the son said, "Well, mother, why are you weak?" And she said, "Well, I haven't eaten in 32 days. And he said, "Mom, why haven't you eaten in 32 days? And she said, "Because I didn't want to have food in my mouth in case you would call me." Mothers shouldn't make their children feel guilty. And children shouldn't make their mothers feel guilty. Mothers, the opposite of that conversation between that mother and son should be what you're striving. You need to communicate with your children, not with guilt, but you need to strive to bring joy into your children's lives. You need to be the conduit of God into your children's life. That when your children look at you, they know it's an uplifting experience, something that adds to life, not something that detracts from life. Now let me say a word to children. Children of all ages, we ought to follow the example of Jesus in the way that He related to His mother. Children need to speak to their mothers with a sense of honor. Jesus said, "Dear woman, gracious lady." We have other words in our English dialect that we could use to praise and honor mothers. Children, when was the last time you really complimented your mother? When was the last time you really made your mother feel special? Can I tell you, today's a good day to do that? Today's a good day to compliment and lift up mothers for all that they do for us. So that's the first lesson. Here's the second lesson. Mothers, be aware of your child's potential. It's kind of interesting when Mary is at this wedding celebration and the wine suddenly runs out. Immediately she went to Jesus because Mary knew Jesus could do something about the situation. Now when you read this story, you get the impression that maybe if she hadn't mentioned it to Jesus, the water would not have been changed into wine because no one else at that wedding reception recognized Jesus' potential. It was his mother. No one else in that group knew he had the capacity to perform a miracle, not even his disciples who were walking with him. Did you notice verse 11? This, the first of his miraculous signs, Jesus performed in Cana of Galilee. He thus revealed his glory, and his disciples put their faith in him. Before he ever did anything spectacular, his mother recognized there was something special in him. Can I tell you this morning that every son and daughter needs a mother to look at them and recognize there's something special in them? There's something that God has placed within their life that is absolutely special and unique to them. And a mother ought to recognize that before anyone else ever has the chance to. Moms, look for the strengths in your children. Remind them of the good they can do. And children of all ages, remember, your mom may see some things in you that no one else sees. She may see potential in you that you're not even aware of. So it's a good idea to listen to mom, to trust her. Mary probably remembered when the angel visited her on that night many years before, when he said that you were going to have a special child. And here at this wedding reception celebration, she remembered those words, and the specialness of that child was celebrated and the glory of God began to be revealed. Mothers, be aware of your children's potential. And then lastly, the third lesson, be willing to let your children do things themselves. Mothers, be willing to let children do things themselves. Mary told Jesus about the situation that this wedding reception had ran out of wine. And she looked at the servants and said to them, "Do whatever he tells you." And then she stepped out of the picture. Jesus solved the problem his way, using his methods. And he used it to begin a ministry to the world. When you read this account, we have the advantage that Mary didn't have. We know what eventually happened. Jesus performed this first miracle and then many other miracles, and thousands of people were impacted by his ministry. And then, just a few years later, he died on a cross for our sins. He rose again on the third day. We know all of that, but Mary didn't know that when she said to the servants, "Do whatever he asks." She didn't know all the details of the upcoming events in the life of her son, but she did recognize that he was no ordinary son. And she knew that she had to let him do his work, his way, or God's way. So she said to the servants in verse 5, "Do whatever he tells you." Can I say something in a loving way? Please notice Mary didn't try to tell Jesus how to do his miracles. Mary didn't try to tell Jesus how to be the Messiah. She let him make his own decisions his own way. Every parent needs to learn how to release their children and step back, and at the right time allow their children to start making some decisions for themselves. Sometimes your children will make decisions that you don't agree with. Sometimes your children will make decisions you simply don't understand. But mothers and fathers come to that place where they have to allow their children to handle the details of their lives and themselves and be there in a supportive role. Now, while it's important to stay involved in your child's life, it's also important that you don't control your child's life. You allow God to work his will, his purpose, his way in your children's life. Part of what makes that very difficult for mothers and for fathers is that mothers always see children as children. Did you ever notice no matter what age your children are, you still see them as children? My daughter will be turning 30 next month. I walked her down the aisle last fall. When I think of Kathleen, I still think of her as that little girl I used to hold in my arms. That I used to just stand there amazed looking at. Now she's a married woman going to turn 30. Here I am telling ages again, but it's Mother's Day, so I guess it's okay. And I got to tell you, I've been thinking about my own mother this week. And I got to thinking about a conversation I had with my mother just a couple of days before she died. She was at our home in Maryland, and we were talking about our family. We were talking about my dad and the fact that she had 3 sons and 2 daughters. And we talked about our family and some of our experiences across the years. But I remember her saying one thing to me that day that I've never forgotten. I was 25 years old. I was married. I was a pastor. And she looked at me across the room and she said, "Forrest, you'll always be my baby boy." That was 31 years ago. Listen, your children are always going to be your children, but sometimes you have to step back and let them live. Let them make their own decisions. You have to be willing to let them do things their own way. It doesn't mean you're not involved. It doesn't mean you don't care. It doesn't mean that you don't trust their judgment. It just means you've done all that you could in their formative years to love and encourage and help them. And you now recognize you have a responsibility to love them as they go about living life. You see, what we see from John chapter 2 this Mother's Day is that a mother never stops being a mother. It goes on, and I want you to recognize that a son or a daughter never stops needing a mother. I was reading this week, and I think it was into the Second World War, that one reporter was taken to where many of the soldiers were recovering from war wounds. And he said it was a very devastating scene, but the thing that captured his attention was many of those soldiers, while they were laying there wounded and in tremendous pain, were asking for one thing: their mother. Mothers have a tremendous influence upon us. Your mother may no longer live at your house, but they still are needed. Moms, you need to involve yourselves in the lives of your children. We need to discover that there are possibilities all around us for mothers and children to celebrate life. Mothers need to support their children. Children need to support their mothers. We need to rediscover what it means to be a family in this day and age. And this is a wonderful day for us to do that. A mother's role in her children's life is very important. That's why we take this special day to honor mothers. May I say today, mothers, thank you. Thank you for all that you do. But most of all, you need to, if you can say in your voice, in your words, Mother, thank you for being my mother. I wished I could do that today. I can only do that in my heart as a memory. But if you have the opportunity to see your mother today, would you thank her? Maybe use Jesus' words: thank you, dear woman. Thank you, gracious lady. Thank you for your touch on my life. My prayer is God would continue to bless us with godly